Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Rust Web Development. This is about the upcoming book by Bastian Gruber, and we will have a Q&A following Bastian's presentation. Next slide, please, Raj. My name is Mike Dwyer. I'm a practice lead at Amsource. I look after our international team, do a lot of work in Berlin, which is how I've come to know Bastian. Next one. So who are Amsource? Well, we're a talent solutions business. We work globally, helping tech businesses. We are a consultancy and talent business. We have a range of products to help businesses build teams and scale their businesses. We are pretty good at webinars now, I think, thanks to COVID. And we have been going 10 years now as a business. And we advise businesses in terms of talent strategy, retention and scaling. Something that we are very much into is community within technology. I am responsible for DevOpsBerlin.de, which is a web page and I suppose a vessel for hosting events. I also co-founded Byproduct. So if you are a product person, we're a Slack community of 140, and again we run bespoke events for leadership within product. Next slide. Our most recent event, similar to what we're doing today, we had Nigel Poulton join us. He is the author of the Kubernetes book. He's a Docker captain, and he is also a Pluralsight instructor. So if Kubernetes is something you're interested in, check out our YouTube channel because those sessions are recorded on there. And today's session is with Bastian Gruber, and he has an upcoming book, Rust Web Development. Bastian is a senior engineer. He's currently a solutions architect for Twilio, and he also co-organizes the Berlin-based Rust and Tell meetup group. And over to Bastian.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm gonna start by sharing my screen. I hope you can see it. You can see the slides?
Yep, that looks good.
Okay, perfect. So thank you for joining. Today's webinar is about Rust and Rust in a web development or in a web environment. So this talk is partly about the book, partly about my experience with Rust at a company, and also to go a bit into the technical depth from like Rust, sort of like a low-level bird's eye view to see why it makes sense from a tech perspective to choose Rust, but also the struggles you might find inside a company and all the stuff around it. So my name is Bastian Gruber. You can find me on Twitter under Receive Online. I was part previously on the Rust, on the like official Rust async group. I founded the Rust and Tell Berlin meetup, and I worked as a Rust engineer for around a year at a company called Kraken. It's a digital exchange company where you can buy cryptocurrencies. I'm currently a solutions architect at Twilio. Twilio is a company. If you received an email from the Zoom invite, this email comes from Twilio. If you receive a text message from your favorite cab driving company, this text message also comes from Twilio. So Twilio is a communications backbone of the internet. And I'm also currently writing the book Rust Web Development. And the book is out now. The first 3 chapters are published. I'm currently trying hard to finish the chapter 6. If you pre-buy the book now, you can read along, and you have an online forum where you can give a feedback, leave comments, and read the chapters as they come out. And I estimate that the book will be done by February next year, so that you can have a proper paperback version by the end of this time, or you choose like a ebook version. There is a website for this book called rustwebdevelopment.com, and I'm trying in the future to write more blog posts like around this topic. So this book is a practical hands-on Rust book. Like, it's not a language book. It's more about how can I get started with a prior background, maybe in Go or Node.js. How can I understand web development in Rust, and how can I start and finish and deploy a project. And it's also good for you as a CTO, team lead, if you hire a Rust developer and they have no prior experience, that they can jump into your project after having read the book. Oops, jump to the last slide. This was a nice shortcut, sorry. Yeah, so about the book, I already mentioned this, and my intention with the book was that I was lacking hands-on material like around Rust. It's all the Rust books so far, or 90% of the books from the bigger publishers, are mostly about the language, about the syntax, but not so much about how to do a project in Rust. So if you in the future or after this talk try to apply for a Rust role, you can read this book, and then you can like apply at a Rust shop. I feel confident that after you've read the book back to back, that you're able to call yourself a junior Rust developer, and you can play around in your free time or apply at a Rust shop at the company. Or if you hire like a new Rust dev, you can hand them this book, and then after reading the book, it's not too thick, they can start to contribute to your code base. And why I chose Rust. So my background is I started on the mainframe as a PL1 programming at an insurance company at Allianz. So I mostly did batch processing there. I did Java client, like Java Windows applications. Then I did some front-end stuff for startups. I did back-end work in Node. I did back-end in Python, and I did full stack in React and Node.js. And then I decided I need a break from all this JavaScript full stack stuff. I want to learn a proper language. And with proper, I mean not to spend years in trying to learn a framework and then the framework is obsolete after like a few weeks or months. I want to learn something which is foundational to my career. And by learning Rust, even if you don't write Rust in your day-to-day work, you can still profit from the mindsets and from the thinking you have to go through by learning this language. So like a tech career is always, for example, if you have learned HTML and CSS 15 years ago, you made a killing, like you earned like lots of money by building smaller websites, but after a few years, the skill was widespread and your return was small. The same is with Java and JavaScript and Python. In the beginning, you earn like lots of money because there is a demand. But after a certain amount of time, people can do the skills. There are no coding platforms out there. So by just knowing a language alone, you don't make a difference. And therefore, I decided to learn sort of like a systems programming language. I didn't want to learn C++ and C, since for me, it's not so much fun to work full time in these languages. But Rust is a great choice where you can touch like a system, you can write databases, web servers, but you can also write higher level REST APIs with Rust. So like with Rust being there, you have to learn more of a foundational computer science architecture of an application. You don't have to, but it gives you the option to do so. It's like learning Spanish or English as a second language. You can move to a new country. This doesn't mean that you like immediately can find a job there, but it lowers the barrier for you to make a living somewhere else. And for a team lead, why you would choose Rust? Because I think in the last 5 years now that Rust is the most loved programming language on Stack Overflow. So people really love to work with the language, and people for now choose to do it on the side. And I feel like if I'm the team lead or like the CTO of a company, I want these people. I want interested people who saw Rust, who really want to learn a new language. And I think that's already like a great filter for you to hire new talent. They also have at least another programming language in the background, or like for most of the times there can be new like Rust people, but it's mostly people come from Go or from Java and they want to learn like Rust, which means it's a higher like a more skilled talent pool. You also have access to an open community. There are tons of Discord channels for each of like web framework, for a tech stack. There are 2 different Rust Discords. There are tons of meetups. So if you have a question and you hit a wall in your day-to-day, there are tons of people like around the globe who you can just access via chat and ask a question. This means you don't always have to go to Stack Overflow and wait a day for a half-baked answer. You can ask the people who built the framework you're currently using and ask them for help. Big brands are choosing Rust. Microsoft is doing a huge push to Rust. Google is using it in their new operating system called Fuchsia or Foxia, or how you pronounce it. It's a replacement or semi-replacement for their Android system, and AWS in the last few months they hired a bunch of talents from the Rust community for their own stack. So you have the backing of big brands. They might soak up the talent you want to hire, but it doesn't take long until there are new people out there. You can also see the talent in the tooling, like around the language. It's high grade. It's probably comparable to Go tooling. It's very high quality third-party packages. And I saw some pre-questions and I want to go into these because people sometimes choose Rust and they want to bring Rust into the company, but then they struggle to make a point, or they try to convince their teammates and they have no idea how to bring in Rust in their company. So like one argument for me would be to say that big brands are backing Rust. They are choosing like Rust for the future, which is a high feedback. Like it's not maybe like a smaller functional programming language you found cool and you heard about it at the meetup. Rust really comes with a huge drive these days from the bigger brands. And my advice is to build a simple CLI to make your to make your peers' life a bit easier. It can be that you have tons of manual work while you code check something, deploy something, have a process, and you do it by hand. Try to build a Rust CLI or like a command line tool in Rust for it, and then share it in your team, and then people can see the code. It's a small code base and people get a first sense of the language. If you're a bit more like advanced, and if you are in a sprint, or like you tell your team lead or your MSCTO, this new feature, this needs a new microservice, but it's small, it can be maybe done in less than a week, try to build it in Rust. And tell the team lead, if it fails, we lost a week of work. That's not so bad. If I'm sick for a week, we also lose a week of work. So please let me try to build it in Rust. It's small. If it fails, we can rewrite it again in Go or in Java. And for companies, I heard in my meetups so far that they struggle. And if you're in Berlin, a company called Prisma is trying to hire Rust people, or they did so like a few months ago, and they told me they struggle since all the blockchain companies can pay way more than they can. So people currently they struggle to find the talent. So if you're eager to learn the language, try to teach it to yourself on the side for half a year, and then try to read the newsletters. There is a This Week in Rust newsletter, which they post every week, and they have a jobs section where they look for Rust people. And why you would choose Rust, and now we come to the tech part of the Rust part, why you would choose Rust in the first place, and if you're not convinced yet, the whole language is so robust that it makes sense to use it wherever Rust is a great fit. And Rust fits on a server, so why not use it for like a REST API or build your whole web server in Rust? I did so. Kraken, the company, their whole stack was in PHP, and they moved completely over to Rust. So they hire a bunch of Rust developers, and they move their whole stack. It makes sense from PHP to move to something else, but they could have chosen Go or Java, but it chose Rust. And other companies did so too, because the language provides you so much guidance that the quality of your code base by default is already higher. It doesn't make a great product by default, but it already hires the bar by quite a lot. And as I mentioned, you have those great external tools written by people who have a strong experience in other languages as well. And the nice part about Rust is that it comes with a package manager, it comes with the documentation and the testing included. So it has the features from JavaScript, Python, and it has the low-level speed from C and C++. So it seems like that you can have your cake and eat it too. Rust really combines both parts. Here we see like one example of the type system. You can create your own types. That's called like an impl block. You can implement an behavior on your own type. Here is like a constructor, and then you can use this like this to print out some information. So you see from the writing, this partly looks like JavaScript or Python, but you have some additional features. So like reading the code might take a bit more time to use more time than Go. But after a few days of reading some source code, it's pretty easy to understand. You have some nice pattern matching where you have enums, and the compiler will also tell you if you didn't cover the cases blue and red here. So here you create a new color, which is red, and then you try to match on these colors later on in your code. And if you wouldn't cover the blue and green case, then your compiler would tell you, hey, there's something missing in your code. So your compiler by default makes sure before you compile your application that it's 99% correct. There's always something which might break during runtime, some edge cases. But if you didn't handle a failure case, if you forgot an enum to check so like the compiler makes sure that you covered the cases, and Rust also doesn't have any sort of null pointers or undefined. This doesn't exist in the Rust world. Here we see that we told this tweet that we pass a string, and these are two things in Rust, like a string slice and a string. And we don't have to go into the details between these two types. You can buy the book to read about it. But in this talk, it's important to understand that even this little problem from the programmer, they forgot to pass a string, and your compiler will tell you where you forgot it and what you should do to fix this problem. So this is sort of like a first, that a compiler is so expressive that it really helps you to improve your code. And the tooling, as I said, is included. You have, like the testing is included, built into the language, and you can even write documentation, comments. These are the 3 slashes. If you compile this, your Rust program will create an HTML version of your documentation and put this on top of like the function. And where you didn't put these doc comments, they will still compile a structure where you can click through all of your types and functions you created in the code. Even this test here will be run during the compilation of like the documentation. So this means that if you put code examples in your documentations, this code will be tested so that you don't end up with outdated code in your documentations. For example, Discord, they switched a part of their stack from Go to Rust, and they wrote a blog post about it. And you can see that the spikes in the Go code, which is in purple here, and after they deployed the Rust version, you can see how much more performant Rust was for them. This means the Go has a runtime and a garbage collection, and Rust doesn't have one. So in Rust, the compiler makes sure that before you compile, that you don't end up with variables which point to an empty value or something like this. Rust doesn't need a garbage collection because of the compiler, which means you end up with C like speed, but with the convenience, which is also not out there, which you don't even get in Python or in Go. So this is quite a nice range to have. And I think if you try to convince your workers or your team lead to use Rust in your company, it's good to point them to these blog posts and tell them this will have a lasting impact on your product. And now, before we go to the Q&A part, since Rust is a systems programming language, it should also run on embedded devices, which means every like additional head on top of the language wants to be avoided, which means Rust decided to not include an HTTP type or like the definition into the standard library. So you can open up a TCP server or like a connection, but you need external packages if you want to create an HTTP server. This is not a problem. There are tons out there. It's actually quite nice to sometimes choose to open up a TCP connection and put your own protocol on top. Use maybe something else than HTTP. And if you want to build an HTTP server, there's tons of great tooling out there to build a pure HTTP server from scratch. Or if you use a web framework, which could be Warp or Actix, they already come with this third-party package included, so you don't have to think about it. And since it's important most of the time to use an asynchronous concept in web development, Rust comes with the syntax support of asynchronous development, but it doesn't have one built in as well. So as Go and Java and Node.js with Google with the V8 engines, they all come packed into the language. and Rust doesn't. So here you also need to choose one runtime, which in the end is also dictated by the web framework you're choosing. This sounds more complex. This is an example of a web framework which opens up like a port and is listening to a path. So this is a basic API. You can see here that we include our runtime, and this is all you need in your application to tell like the runtime you're choosing. And here you see the asynchronous concepts where you mark a function as asynchronous and you await on the result here. So this code also looks like JavaScript or Python code to some degree. The caveats, if you choose like Rust in your journey as a professional or in your company, as we said, it's no HTTP included and you have to choose a runtime, which is a small thing and actually an advantage down the road, because you can always choose another runtime for your needs in certain projects. You can choose a different HTTP abstraction. So it depends on which angle you're coming from. It takes more time to learn the language since it's a systems programming language. So the compiler forces you to think a bit about where you free your memory. This sounds a bit more scary than it actually is. In C, you would have to think about it for yourself, and there's no compiler which is helping you. In Rust, it's a concept called ownership, which is explained in many books and blog posts, which after you've done it for a week, it's fine. And in most of the projects, you get away with it quite nicely. And this is, the borrowing concept. And you have a few more touching points with a system, with asynchronous programming, with threading. For if you come from Go, this might not be such a change. If you come from Python or JavaScript, this might be a bit of a change. So, but here, like again, this is the advantage for your own career. If you choose to go through the learning process, and even if you can't work in Rust, you can more easily pick up like another systems programming language, and you break through, or like you broaden your general computer science knowledge, which then you can use to market your salary higher. You can learn new programming languages. So it's really an entrance into a differentiation of yourself. Like you don't just learn just another syntax. You get much closer to the machine, and I think you will be a much better professional after you learn Rust. And this is a short, brief story through Rust. Why Rust? And I'm happy to answer any questions of how it is to use Rust as a company, how long it takes, what the book is about, what the process is. Feel free to shoot away.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Bastian. I think it's worth letting people know that you'll pick the best question at the end, and there's a free copy of the book, I think you said.
Oh yeah, true. There is, for the best question, they will get a free copy of the book, and for the second most interesting question, they will get a 30% off coupon. So feel free to, after the talk, to send me your email, or I will pick one, and then I think, Mike, you can forward them to me since you have the list. So feel free to ask as many questions as you can, so then you can win a free book, or you get a 30% off.
Yeah. So at the minute we've got a winner because we've got one question. Do you have access to the Q&A, Bastian, with the pop-up?
Yeah. And I can
ask the question.
I can read out the question. I asked this as a Rust fan. Is dealing with the lack of garbage collector worth it in a web backend? Why not use something like Scala and get most of the benefits that you get with Rust? And and a garbage collection too. For performance, we could always write isolated services in Rust. It is worth it from just the perspective of a more understanding code base. I have not tons of experience in Scala, but the work, or in the team I've worked in, they came from Go, they came from Scala, they came from different backgrounds, and they told me they will never go back to Scala or to like another language. It's just, and as I mentioned, that the lack of the garbage collection can help you in your skills, and the compiler makes sure that you understand what you're doing. And the problems you will face maybe will be 5 or 10% in your day-to-day work. So it's actually not a big trade-off. You will face it much less than you would think. And of course, that's a drawback, but it's with like investing, you have to see the upside versus like the downside risk. The downside risk is maybe you get stuck for a week in a problem because of no garbage collection. This is like the worst case, but the best case is you have so much more fun in your everyday and you profit from your skilled colleagues. And we saw with Discord that it's worth to pick Rust. And you said in an isolated service, sure, like you can have both. And then you can even try, you can say that you do Go for your main stack and you use Rust for the high performance part. And then you see, and this might be fine, and you run a 2-stack company or like a project. So I would say, yes, it's worth it. And feel free to use both.
Yeah, there's a few more questions coming in now. I think some people want the book. And the next question is, in your new book, you choose Warp as a web framework. In your opinion, what makes Warp stand out in comparison to Active Web and Rocket? I chose Warp because it's close to the Tokyo stack. And I don't know if it depends on how much Rust you know. Tokyo is maintained by a core group of people which produced high quality code in the past. And Warp is maintained like around this core of this people. I have nothing against Warp or I have nothing against Rocket or Actix. It's just a choice I made, and I think you will also be totally fine to use Actix. Rocket has a bit of a different mindset, and I think just 2 months ago they released an asynchronous first version, so I might have chosen maybe Rocket, although I used Warp at the previous company, was comfortable and I like it. But there's no particular major thing what made me choose it. There are a few more questions. Yeah, what's an async runtime?
Yes. So an async runtime means if you write code, it's getting worked through line by line and stops when there's a higher computation. So as soon as you calculate something more heavy or which takes longer, just like a database query, your code will block and wait for it to finish until you move on to the next one. You can open up an operating system thread, which then you have to go through the kernel, open up a new thread, put the work there, and this is more expensive. And what async runtimes are trying to do is also, at least some of them have this single thread mindset, like Node.js has, where they put work in the background. So they see there is a database query. This takes longer. Please proceed with the rest of the code and try to make progress on the database query as soon as it's done. So it's able to move tasks in the background when they take longer time. This is asynchronous coding, where you can start 5 different processes in the background and wait for all of them and sort of start them at the same time. Therefore, you need a code or like a package or some like mechanism which is maintaining this thread, or which is maintaining this concept of please put this code piece in the background and continue in the foreground. A good example is like a web server where you can have like 1 million requests at the same time. Like not really, but let's say you have like 5,000 requests each minute and they all take time. You don't want to tell 4,000 of them, please wait or please come back later. You want to like accept them and sort of try to work at them at the same time and don't block too much. And yeah, so like you need some form of like a threading, and you don't want to use an operating system thread since they are like more expensive than to do something in the user space. And this is what Tokyo is. And Rust provides the syntax so that Tokyo knows which code block is async and which is not. And I hope this answered the question. Let me click them on done. The next question is Rust ready to manage HTML rendering, or the advice would be to render HTML somewhere else? How strong is Rust in pre-render? I didn't do much HTML rendering, and I wouldn't say this would be my first choice. There might be libraries out there in the future. Right now, it's a lot of, I think, hand wiring the pre-rendering of HTML. And yeah, so it wouldn't be my first choice. If you do like your whole stack in Rust and you need this part too, then maybe it makes sense to not introduce a second language. But if it's your only job in your company to render HTML, then Rust wouldn't be my first choice to pick as of now. In the book, I have been working through the non-Rust frontend code was written in vanilla JavaScript. How well does it integrate with existing JavaScript frameworks, if all? The non-Rust frontend code. So like Rust is not a front-end language. It's more of like a back-end language, and you can use something like Wasm, which is compiling, or which you can write. So like that's a different topic. You can write like a Wasm code and run it in your browser, which can interface with JavaScript. And you can write like Wasm in Rust or in Go or in another language. And this then can be run in the browser, and this can interface your JavaScript frameworks. So like Rust by default is not a front-end, like a front-end language, but it supports Wasm out of the box, or like it's a first grade support because it sort of comes from the same team, or it's built around Rust in the first place. So you can use Rust to write Wasm code and run it in the browser and interfaces JavaScript. The next question is, what do you think about implementing frontend partially in Rust? There are some big web applications that done that. Do you think some code can be shared between front and backend, which was interesting aspect of choosing Node.js? So I haven't done much with Wasm yet. I don't think you quite yet get the same sharing out of it, but I could be wrong. I know that like many blockchain companies are writing Wasm code for their blockchains in Rust. This is all I can say. I think that with JavaScript code shared, because it's JavaScript, like you can run the same code. And if it's Rust, I also think that you can share the same computational code and compile it down to like Wasm. So if you have like a Wasm application, although I don't think how well you can run, like what you would do is like a single page applications in JavaScript, I don't know if this like a web front end WASM stuff is there yet to think about it as a replacement. But these are great questions. You can check out the Rust Discord and ask there, but I don't think it's quite there yet. Yeah, more questions. Considering the fact that Rust's whole ecosystem is young, do you prefer, is it worth it to use it for personal project, for example, microservice architectures, considering the amount, the time and effort and learning gap and the customization you have to add to use it for personal projects? So these are two questions. If you're proficient in one language, it's always faster to use the language you're good at than the one you don't, which means if you're a proficient JavaScript or Go or Java developer, you will obviously take more time to do this in Rust than you would do in another language. I didn't find in our day-to-day work previously in the company, there was not so much tooling we missed. And in my private projects, there was also not the tooling I was like lagging. And there's some stuff which is in its infancies, which is out there, but it's probably not as robust as Java. But for personal projects, I would always prefer, if you choose to do Rust in the future, it's probably good to learn it now where the tooling is not there, because it either gives you the chance to really understand the tooling, because once it's not there, you ask yourself, oh, I never thought about how it works, or I never missed it. And then you maybe want to write the tooling for yourself. So for like a personal point of view, this is for me actually the reason to use Rust now, because you can be part of like the building phase and you learn so much more. To dig deep now into like a Java third-party package, it's probably huge because it's so like robust and feature-proof that it takes you ages to understand this code base. In Rust, if you choose the tooling and you miss something, it's probably still a bit smaller, which means you understand it much faster, and then you can maybe even contribute. So this is a reason to might not use it in some part of your production system, but in your private thing, I would definitely use it. Yeah. If you earn money with your personal project, then it's a different thing. Then I wouldn't care about like the language. If you earn like money, like with two different like microservices, use the one which you can lay on the beach the whole day, then don't bother. But if it's for like a learning perspective and the future proof, then I would choose Rust, definitely. 3 more. Coming into Rust from other languages, are there any language features from your previous languages that you miss? And are there any features from the corresponding web frameworks that the current Rust framework are missing? For example, a Python Django developer would probably miss the Django, or if moving into the Rust ecosystem. I come from a Node.js background largely from the past few years. And I just like how JavaScript and Node.js, it looks so sleek to read and write the code. It's less noisy, which is a downside in larger projects because it will never be like this. But I sometimes miss a bit the mindset, or like just because in Rust, like people come from sometimes C++ or Java, so they are used to much more abstract code, and you can see it in the libraries that they are sometimes a bit too noisy and not as beautiful to look at. So I miss like the proofed tooling and like from these types of languages, and you see it in Rust that it's still like a bit rough sometimes around the edges. But for you have an ORM in Rust, and you can also write directly SQL. You don't have Django, you don't have Ruby on Rails. So yes, if you just want to build something in 30 minutes and have it live, Rust might not be the best thing for like prototyping fast, because in Rust you can't like wing it. You have to think seriously about your structure and your application, which makes it better in a production environment. But yeah, this is like the downside, which you have to like agree on, that you have to think more, build more, design more in Rust, which you might miss. But otherwise, I have to say, I touch now JavaScript and Node code in my current job. I don't like it. I feel unsafe. I really miss the Rust compiler, and I will choose like Rust in any future job on the spot. 2 more. Hope we have time. Yeah. Next question. I've been using Warp for about 18 months. Wow. Wrote 8,000 lines of code for general purpose, user-facing API backend, and I find Warp a bit difficult to understand, but in 2019, it was either that or Active SQL for true async web framework. Would you choose Warp again in 2021, or would you evaluate another framework? Yes. I think that Aptix Web is still, I think, the most popular choice. I think that like Rocket will catch up because now it's truly asynchronous. So I think that people didn't choose it in the past because it didn't work in an asynchronous way. I agree, and this is the part I miss. It's still a bit rough. It's not as easy to understand. And you sometimes lack a bit about the usability or like knowing like what's going on. From what I would say is try Actix or try Rocket, or get involved. I read through like the Warp source code, and if you're this experienced to write 8,000 lines of code for this API, you might already have the skills to improve the code base. They have a super friendly Discord channel where the creator of Warp answered like a bunch of questions, or like is all the time answering some questions, and is open to build new stuff in the framework. So I would approach it like this. There is one out there which is called Tide, which or Tide or Tide, or I think it's Tide, which looks for me the closest to a Node.js web framework, which I like the most from a syntax perspective, but I don't know how much this is used in a large production environment. So it depends on the scale of your projects. I also read through the pull request. It doesn't seem to be super actively maintained. There's no Discord around it, which answers the questions. So this is, I would have chosen Tide if this would have been a bit more actively maintained by more people, because this is from a syntax, for me, the most beautiful and straightforward framework to use. But I chose Warp because of the robustness, and I know that larger companies are like using it, and these developers are also part of like AWS or something. So I know people develop this. So yeah, I'm sadly I don't have a perfect answer, but I would try Rocket maybe. And the last question is, you mentioned blockchain companies are using Rust. What do you think about Rust, Wasm, and cryptocurrency integration, like interfacing with nodes in browser-based apps moving forward? Oof, there's a lot of packed in. I have not much experience in browser-based Wasm. I know that blockchain companies are choosing Rust because it's so robust, and if they plan to scale, they need the speed and the safety, and it's money, so it needs to be good. So for like the browser-based, so, and I didn't follow up like the Wasm stuff lately, but I think, yes, like dig your toes into this or do something about it. I think this space can be part of a future. In those things, it's always the case, you learn something and then it turns out not to be true. But if you learn it and it turns out to be true, then you're the person who already has 2 or 3 years of experience and can request a higher salary. So I think from a technical point of view, I think this is where it's going. I have high conviction, and I would do it if you're interested in it, because of this safetyness. I also I think I was on a talk once in Montreal 4 years ago where they did the Ethereum client plugin in the browser, where the guy who wrote the plugin mentioned that JavaScript was not even capable of doing some form of calculations, or like the precision was not there. So I think that JavaScript in general at some point has to be replaced for those critical calculation projects. So I think this is where the puck is going. How it will look like, I have no idea, but I would, if this is, I think that's the way forward.
Yeah. In the chat, Karthik mentions Parity Wallet is written in Rust, and I think from what I can see, it's all being driven from Polkadot. You know, a lot of people want to contribute or use Polkadot blockchain, which is all written in Rust, and that's where all the action seems to be. It's I think there's an upcoming hackathon to get on the Substrate program as well. So that's all on Discord. So if you are interested in that, definitely check that out.
Yeah. So this space is a generally great tool to look out for. If you look for jobs, this is, I think that Parity is a high quality employee. I know that Kraken is hiring like Rust developers like crazy. Amsource is probably looking for Rust people. So I'm sure that if you learn the language and can be a bit patient, the payoff is huge. Like especially now, since you're at the forefront of the wave, and I think like the wave is still to hit the beach. So like you're still in the middle of the ocean. And as one question was that the web frameworks are not so robust yet. It's true, that's the downside, but I think like the upside of like learning Rust is still so huge that it's worth your time.
Yeah. Excellent. So that's the end of the Q&A. So thanks for that, Bastian. I think everyone pretty happy with the answers. There's some positive feedback in the chat function. You just need to pick your favorite question.
I can see all the answers. Can I decide afterwards, or I can take now? Can I? No, wait a minute. I have to go through.
These?
I have to look at all of them.
Yeah, just making sure we don't lose the questions, I think.
Okay. So actually, like the first question was great because it's so practical. If it's worth to use like Rust, if it doesn't have a garbage collection instead of Scala, or just in performance part. I think this was right away my favorite one.
Okay, that's Karthik. Brilliant. And do you have a second favorite? Something that you found interesting?
Preferred use in first project. I like the warp part, like the Anto, which wrote 8,000 lines of warp code and asked like if there is a better web framework out. This is pretty on the spot, which also pain points I felt.
Perfect. Well, Karthik gets a book. Anto gets a voucher for discount on the book. And how does it work? So there's 3 chapters available now, and then as they're released, if you bought the book, you get access to the chapter as it's released.
Right.
Is that how it works?
Right. So like each time you get an email, it's in your Manning library. You can also read then the book online and leave like the comments and feedback. So it's not like money spent on something. Like you can actually ask some questions, give Emma feedback on the content, and it's in your like Manning book library. You download the PDF or the ebook, and it will get updated each time a chapter is out. I'm currently like working on the chapter 6. It's hopefully done soon, and yeah, by hopefully by February, the whole book is done.
Excellent. Brilliant. Well, I think we're just about on time to wrap up. So thanks for sharing and answering those questions, Bastian. I think it's been pretty insightful into Rust. I guess I'll say is everyone, thanks for joining us, and please buy Bastian's book. And feel free to find the Rust and Tell meetup on Meetup, and that'll be listed as a Berlin meetup, won't it? But I'm guessing you're online at the moment.
Yeah, we're still purely online. And feel free to get in touch on Twitter or email if you have any questions around the book or like Rust. I'm always happy to chat or help out.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thanks everybody, and thanks Bastian. And
thank you.
We'll see some of you again at other events.
Yes, and take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.